It is the evening of November 28th, 1981, a Saturday. The yacht is called the Splendor, and it is anchored off the coast of Santa Catalina Island, 11 miles from the California mainland, in a dark stretch of water called Isthmus Cove. On board are 4 people: a Hollywood actress who was once the most famous child star in America and who is now, at 43, still one of the most recognizable women in the world. Her husband, an actor whose name you know. A younger actor who had been her co-star in a film they had just finished shooting. And a boat captain who has worked for the couple for years and who will spend the rest of his life trying to decide what to say about what he saw that night. The actress's name is Natalie Wood. At some point between 11 in the evening and 1 in the morning, she goes into the water. She is wearing a red down jacket, a flannel nightgown, and socks. She does not know how to swim. She has been afraid of dark water her entire life, a fear so specific and so deep that the people who knew her have described it as something close to terror. She has talked about it in interviews. She has refused to film certain scenes because of it. She has, by her own account, dreamed about dark water her whole life and woken up afraid. She goes into it anyway, or she is put into it, or she falls. 43 years later, no one has been charged with her death. And the question of what happened on the Splendor that night has never been fully answered. But 3 hours before she went into the water, she called her sister. And what she said in that phone call is the thing I want to tell you about tonight. Her real name was not Natalie Wood. She was born Natalia Nikolaevna Zakharenko on the 20th of July, 1938, in San Francisco, California, the second daughter of Russian immigrants who had come to America carrying very little except a set of beliefs about beauty and fate and the power of the stage that would shape their younger daughter's entire life. Her father, Nikolai Zakharenko, was a carpenter and a quiet man, gentle by most accounts, who drank more than was good for him, and who spent his American years never quite finding the solid ground he had been looking for when he left Russia. Her mother, Maria Stepanovna Zudilov, was something else entirely. Maria was a woman of fierce ambition and absolute conviction, who had decided, before Natalie was old enough to walk steadily, that her daughter was going to be a star. This is not a figure of speech. Maria Zakharenko looked at her small daughter and made a decision the way other people make appointments. She saw something in the child's face. In the dark eyes and the particular quality of stillness that Natalie had, even as a toddler, and she concluded that this child was meant for the camera. And then she set about making it happen with the kind of focused, relentless energy that moves mountains and also sometimes damages the people it is focused on. She took Natalie to auditions at the age of 3. At 4, Natalie was cast as an extra in a film being shot in Santa Rosa, California. A small part, a child in a crowd scene. But Maria made sure that the director noticed her daughter, and the director did notice her, and Natalie was given a small moment in the film, a close-up, a few seconds of screen time. The director's name was Irving Pickle. He remembered the child. 3 years later, when he was casting a film called Tomorrow is Forever for RKO Pictures, he asked for the little girl with the dark eyes from Santa Rosa. Natalie was 7 years old. The film starred Claudette Colbert and Orson Welles. Natalie played a European refugee child with a German accent that she learned phonetically because she did not speak German. She learned it the way she would learn everything in those years, quickly and completely and without complaint, because her mother had made clear that complaint was not something the family had time for. The film was a success. The child in it was noticed. And Maria Zakharenko's plan, if you could call a mother's absolute iron will a plan, began to work exactly as she had decided it would. In 1947, when Natalie was 8 years old, she was cast in Miracle on 34th Street alongside Maureen O'Hara and Edmund Gwenn. She played Susan Walker, the skeptical little girl who does not believe in Santa Claus and then does. The film was released at Thanksgiving and became one of the most beloved Christmas pictures in American cinema. The little girl with the dark eyes and the serious face was suddenly known in living rooms across the country. Fan mail arrived at the studio. Magazines wanted her photograph. At 8 years old, Natalie Wood, which was the name the studio had given her because Zakharenko was considered too difficult, was a working actress with a public identity and a mother who managed every detail of that identity with absolute precision. What she did not have at 8 years old was a childhood. This is the thing that takes time to understand about Natalie Wood, and it is the thing that makes everything that followed make sense. She did not grow up the way other children grow up, in the gradual, mostly private process of becoming a person. She grew up in public, on camera, in the full view of an audience that felt it knew her and had opinions about her and expected certain things from her. The character she played in film after film in those years was a version of a child, earnest, sweet, a little solemn, capable of great feeling. And because the camera saw her that way, the world saw her that way. And because the world saw her that way, she spent a very long time not quite knowing how to be seen any other way. Her mother did not help with this. Maria Wood, as she had renamed herself along with her daughter, was not a cruel woman in the way that word is usually meant. She did not withhold love. She was present, intensely present, in every moment of Natalie's professional life. But the love she offered was calibrated to performance. When Natalie did well, when the director was pleased, when the reviews were good, Maria was warm and proud and generous. When things did not go well, when a role was lost, when a scene had to be reshot, the warmth withdrew. Not dramatically, subtly, in the way that makes a child work harder to get it back. Natalie worked harder to get it back. She always did. She became, by the time she was a teenager, one of the most reliable and professional young actresses in Hollywood, which meant she was also one of the most anxious, because reliability in this context meant that she could not afford to fail. And anxiety is what happens when failure is not permitted. In 1955, she was cast in Rebel Without a Cause alongside James Dean and Salma Neo. She was 16 years old. The film was about teenagers who felt disconnected from the adult world, who were angry and afraid and hungry for something they could not name. Natalie played Judy, a girl who seems to have everything and who is dying inside. It was not, by any account, a stretch. The director of Rebel Without a Cause was Nicholas Ray, a man in his late 30s who was intense and brilliant and who had a history of complicated relationships with his young actors. What happened between Nicholas Ray and Natalie Wood during the making of that film has been written about carefully by her biographer, Suzanne Finstad, and what Finstad found, after years of interviews with the people who were there, is deeply uncomfortable. Ray was in a position of absolute professional power over a 16-year-old girl whose entire identity was built around pleasing the people who directed her. What happened in that context was not something Natalie spoke about publicly for most of her life. What we know is that something happened, and that it marked her, and that the way she related to powerful men for the rest of her life was shaped, at least in part, by what she learned in that room. She was 16 years old. She was already a professional. She was not protected the way a child in that situation deserved to be protected. And she went on. Because going on was the only thing she knew how to do. Rebel Without a Cause made her a star of a different kind. Not the earnest child of Miracle on 34th Street, but a young woman, troubled and beautiful and real in the way that the camera catches realness when it is not performing. The film was released in October of 1955, weeks after James Dean died in a car crash on a California highway, and the combination of the film's themes and Dean's death and the particular quality of the three young actors in it made it something more than a movie. It became a document of a generation's anxiety, and Natalie Wood was at the center of it. She was nominated for an Academy Award for Splendor in the Grass in 1961. She was nominated again for Love with the Proper Stranger in 1963. She was, through her 20s, one of the most sought-after actresses in Hollywood, working with the best directors and opposite the biggest male stars. She did West Side Story in 1961 playing Maria, and her face in that film is so open and so luminous that it is almost painful to watch, because you can see in it the child she had been and the woman she was trying to become, and the gap between those two things that she was spending her whole life trying to close. She also fell in love, repeatedly, and with a kind of intensity that the people around her recognized as something more than ordinary romantic feeling. She fell in love the way people fall in love when they have been performing their emotions for other people their whole lives and have only recently discovered that feelings can be private. She fell hard, and she fell completely, and she sometimes fell badly. She married Robert Wagner in 1957. He was a young actor, handsome and charming and ambitious, and the two of them together made a kind of Hollywood couple that the magazines of the late 1950s loved to photograph. They were golden. They were beautiful. They were, by all appearances, exactly what each of them was supposed to be. They divorced in 1962. The reasons have been written about at length and with varying degrees of certainty. What is clear is that something happened in their marriage that broke it, and that the breaking was serious enough that it took Natalie Wood a long time to recover from it. She went through a period in the early 1960s that the people who knew her described with careful words. She was struggling, she was fragile, she was not entirely herself. She was also still working, still performing, still showing up on set and delivering the kind of professional work that directors depended on, because that was what she did. That was what she had always done. She married again, a producer named Richard Gregson, in 1969, and with him she had her first daughter, Natasha. The marriage did not survive either, ending in 1971 after Natalie discovered that Gregson had been unfaithful. She has spoken about that discovery in interviews, quietly and without bitterness, in the way that people speak about pain they have decided to carry rather than put down. And then in 1972, she married Robert Wagner again. This is the part of the story that most people know, or think they know, because it is the part that ended on a yacht off Catalina Island in November of 1981. And because the ending has been examined and argued about and investigated and reinvestigated for more than 4 decades. But I want to stay with the middle of it for a moment, because the middle of it is where Natalie Wood actually lived, and it deserves more attention than it usually gets. The second marriage to Wagner was, by the accounts of the people who knew them, genuinely happy in ways the first had not been. They had a daughter together, Courtney, born in 1974. They lived in a house in Beverly Hills and then on the water in Malibu. They had a circle of friends that included many of the most interesting people in Hollywood. Wagner produced television. Natalie acted when she chose to, more selectively than before, because she now had children and a domestic life that she had not had in her 20s, and that she valued in a way that sometimes surprised people who had known her as the driven, relentless young actress of the 1960s. She had become, in her 30s and early 40s, a woman who had found some equilibrium. The anxiety was still there, by all accounts. The fear of dark water was still there, specific and undiminished. The need to be loved that had been installed in her by a childhood in which love and performance were the same thing was still there. But she had built a life around real things: her daughters, her friends, her marriage, her work when she chose it. In 1981, she agreed to do a science fiction film called Brainstorm, shooting in North Carolina. Her co-star was a young actor named Christopher Walken, who was 38 years old and at the height of his fame following The Deer Hunter. The shoot went well. The two actors liked each other professionally and personally. And when the shooting was finished in the autumn of 1981, Wagner and Natalie invited Wood to join them for a weekend on the Splendor, anchored off Catalina Island. It was Thanksgiving weekend. Lana Wood, Natalie's younger sister, has spoken about the phone call many times over the years, in interviews and in her memoir, and in the documentary that examined the case in 2020. The call came in the evening of November 28th, a Saturday. Natalie called Lana from the yacht, and what she said, in the words that Lana has used to describe it, was that something felt wrong, that there had been tension, that the men had been drinking, that she was uncomfortable, and she was not sure why, and she wanted Lana to know. Lana has said that she told her sister to go to sleep, that she said it would be fine in the morning, that she did not, in the moment, understand that her sister was frightened in a way that was different from the ordinary friction of a difficult evening. 3 hours later, Natalie Wood went into the water. The official investigation at the time determined that her death was an accidental drowning. The case was closed. Robert Wagner and Christopher Walken were interviewed but not considered suspects. The boat captain, Dennis Davern, gave a statement that matched the general account of the evening provided by the two actors. And then, 30 years later, Dennis Davern changed his story. In 2011, Davern gave a detailed account to investigators and to the authors of a book about Natalie Wood's death, in which he said that his original statement had not been complete or accurate. He said that there had been a serious argument on the yacht that night between Natalie and Robert Wagner, and that the argument had been witnessed and that he had not reported it truthfully because he had been pressured not to. He said that Wagner had not immediately called for help when it became clear that Natalie was missing, that there had been a delay, and that the delay had been significant. In 2011, the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department reopened the investigation. The cause of death was changed from accidental drowning to drowning with undetermined factors. Robert Wagner was named a person of interest in 2018, which is a designation that means investigators believe he has information relevant to the death, but which falls short of naming him a suspect. He has not been charged. He has declined to be interviewed by investigators in the reopened case. He has, through representatives, maintained that he had nothing to do with his wife's death and that the reopening of the case is a painful intrusion on his grief. The case remains open. I am going to be careful here, because careful is the only honest way to handle what we know and what we do not know. What we know is this: Natalie Wood went into the water at some point between 11 in the evening and 1 in the morning on November 28, 1981. She was afraid of dark water. She was wearing clothing that would have made swimming extremely difficult. She had been drinking, and the autopsy confirmed a blood alcohol level above the legal limit for driving. She had bruises on her body that the original coroner noted, and that subsequent forensic review has described as consistent with having been in an altercation before entering the water, though this assessment is disputed. What we do not know is who, if anyone, put her in the water. We do not know what the argument that Davern described was about. We do not know what Natalie Wood meant when she told her sister something felt wrong. We do not know, and may never know, what the last hour of her life looked like. What we know is that she called her sister and said she was afraid, and that 3 hours later she was dead, and that the people who were with her that night have never given a full and consistent account of what happened, and that one of them, the boat captain who was there, has said under oath that what he told investigators in 1981 was not the truth. Natalie Wood was 43 years old. She had 2 daughters, Natasha, who was 11, and Courtney, who was 7. She had a life she had built carefully and with great effort out of the wreckage of a childhood that had given her everything except the one thing children actually need, which is the freedom to become a person without an audience watching. In the days after her death, the coverage was enormous. The photographs were everywhere. The dark-haired woman with the luminous eyes, who had been famous since she was 8 years old, and who had died in the water she had been afraid of her entire life. The tributes came from every corner of the industry she had been part of for 35 years. People who had worked with her and people who had only watched her on screen spoke about her with a particular kind of grief that was not just professional loss, but something more personal. The grief of people who felt they had known her because they had watched her face for so long. Her daughters have grown up in the shadow of that death. Natasha Wagner has been, in her adult life, a careful and private person who has spoken about her mother selectively. Courtney Wagner has been more public, has spoken about missing a mother she was too young to fully remember, has spoken about the investigation and what it has meant to her to live for decades without an answer to the question of what happened on the Splendor that night. Both daughters have said, in their own ways, that they want to know the truth, that they deserve to know the truth. Lana Wood has spent 40 years with the phone call. She has spoken about it in the way that people speak about the one thing they cannot put down, the conversation they would give anything to have back so they could say something different. She was not responsible for what happened to her sister. No reasonable person would say that she was. But she spoke to Natalie 3 hours before she died. And Natalie told her something was wrong. And Lana told her it would be fine. And it was not fine. And that is a weight that does not get lighter with time. I want to say something about Natalie Wood, the actress, because it is possible in a story like this to lose the person inside the circumstances of the death, and she was too important to lose that way. She was, at her best, one of the most naturally gifted screen actresses of her generation. The thing the camera caught in her was not beauty, though she was beautiful. It was interiority. It was the sense that something was happening behind the eyes that the character was not saying out loud. This is the rarest quality in film acting, and it cannot be taught. Either the camera finds it, or it does not. In Natalie Wood, it found it from the time she was 8 years old, and it never lost it. Watch her in Rebel Without a Cause, in the scene where she is sitting in the police station at the beginning of the film, waiting, not doing anything, just sitting. She is 16 years old and she is doing nothing, and you cannot take your eyes off her. Watch her in Splendor in the Grass, in the scene where she breaks down in the hallway at school, the scene that got her the Academy Award nomination, and notice that what makes it devastating is not the breakdown itself, but the 5 seconds before it, when she is trying not to break down and failing. Watch her in West Side Story when Maria learns that Tony is dead and does not cry. Notice what she does instead. She knew things about human feeling that most people never articulate. She knew them because she had been performing human feeling for other people since she was old enough to stand on a mark and look into a lens. And at some point in that long education, the performance became understanding. She knew what grief looked like from the inside because she had been grief on camera dozens of times, and each time she had to find it again from somewhere real. The irony is profound and painful. The woman who could show you the inside of any human emotion on a screen could not, in the end, show the people on that yacht what she was feeling. She called her sister instead. She said something was wrong. She did not say how wrong. In 2022, Courtney Wagner gave an interview in which she said that she believed her father, Robert Wagner, was responsible for her mother's death. This was not a casual statement. It was a statement made by a daughter who has lived with this question for 4 decades and who has reached a conclusion. Wagner's representatives disputed the characterization. The investigation remains open. The Splendor was sold after Natalie's death. It changed hands several times. For a while, it was used as a charter vessel. It has been written about in every account of that night as if it were a character in the story, which in a way it is. A yacht anchored off an island in the dark, 4 people on board, and then 3, and then morning, and then a body found floating in the water near the shore. The island of Santa Catalina is still there, 11 miles off the California coast. Isthmus Cove is still there. The same dark water, the same rocks, the same stretch of Pacific that has no particular interest in what happened there in November of 1981 and would look exactly the same if nothing had happened at all. The investigation is still open. The question is still open. And Lana Wood still lives with the phone call. There is a photograph of Natalie Wood taken sometime in the late 1970s. In the second marriage, in the years that the people who knew her describe as the happiest of her adult life. She is standing outside somewhere with trees, and she is laughing at something off camera. And she looks entirely unguarded in a way that her professional photographs almost never show. The professional photographs show the star, the public face, the dark eyes arranged for the camera. This photograph shows something else. A woman in her late 30s who has survived a childhood that could have broken her, and a first marriage that did break her, and a period of fragility that she does not talk about in interviews, and who has come out the other side of all of it into something that looks, in this photograph, genuinely like peace. That is the woman who called her sister on the evening of November 28, 1981, and said that something felt wrong. She was 43 years old. She had more films in her. She had daughters who needed a mother for decades more. She had a life that had finally, after everything, become her own. She went into the water that night, and she did not come back. And the answer to what happened, the full and honest answer that her daughters deserve, and that her sister deserves, and that anyone who has watched her face on a screen for 60 years deserves, has not yet been given. It may never be given. But the phone call happened. Natalie Wood called her sister and said something was wrong. That part is not disputed by anyone. And if you take that fact seriously, if you sit with it and let it mean what it means, then the story of her death is not the story of an accident. It is the story of a woman who knew something, who felt something, who reached out to the person she trusted most, and who was not reached back in time. That is the truth we have. Not the whole truth, but enough of it to know that the word accident, the word the original investigation used, is not the right word. It is not the whole word. There is more under it, in the dark water where the answer still lies, waiting for someone to be honest enough to bring it up. Her name was Natalia Nikolaevna Zakharenko. The world called her Natalie Wood. She was born in San Francisco on the 20th of July, 1938, and she was famous before she was old enough to understand what famous meant. And she spent her whole life trying to find the person underneath the fame. And by the accounts of the people who loved her, she had found her, or was very close to finding her, when the water took her. She was 43 years old. Take care of yourself tonight, my friend, wherever you are listening from, in whatever room, in whatever quiet hour. And if someone you love calls you and says something feels wrong, listen carefully. Listen all the way to the end. Ask the question they are not quite asking. Stay on the line a little longer than you think you need to. She called her sister. Her sister told her it would be fine. It was not fine. Good night. There is something that gets lost in the telling of a life like hers, and I want to try to find it before we finish tonight, because it matters and because she deserves it. When we talk about Natalie Wood, we tend to talk about the famous parts, the films, the marriages, the death. We talk about Miracle on 34th Street and Rebel Without a Cause and West Side Story. We talk about the yacht and the water and the investigation that has gone on for 4 decades without an answer. These things are all real and all important and all part of who she was. But there was also an ordinary person in there. A woman who liked to cook and who kept a garden and who read voraciously and who was, by the accounts of everyone who knew her privately, funny in a dry, quiet way that did not come through in her public persona at all. A woman who worried about her daughters in the specific and practical ways that mothers worry. About school, about friends, about whether they were happy, about whether she was present enough when the work took her away. A woman who had been afraid of dark water her whole life, and who dealt with that fear not by pretending it did not exist, but by simply working around it, by not getting into small boats alone, by staying away from the edges of things, by being careful. She was careful. The careful thing about the night of November 28, 1981, is that everything about it contradicts what we know about how careful she was. She was not a woman who got into small dinghies alone at night. She was not a woman who went near dark water willingly. She was not a woman who took unnecessary risks with the one thing she had been afraid of her entire life. Every person who knew her has said some version of this. The fear was real, and it was specific, and it was not the kind of fear that evaporates after a few glasses of wine on a Saturday night. And yet, she ended up in the water. This is the thing the original investigation did not sit with long enough. Not the blood alcohol level, not the bruises, not the question of who was arguing with whom. The fundamental thing. Natalie Wood, who was terrified of dark water, ended up alone in the dark water on a night when there was no reason for her to be anywhere near it. That does not happen by accident in the ordinary sense of the word accident. Something happened on that boat. Something that has not been fully told by the people who were there to tell it. And the reason we do not know what it was, after 43 years, is that the person who would have told us is the one who went into the water. Robert Wagner published a memoir in 2008. It is called Pieces of My Heart. In it, he describes the night of Natalie's death with a brevity that many people who have read it have found striking given the weight of what he is describing. He says that they had been drinking, that there had been a disagreement, that he went to bed, that when he woke up and found her missing, he searched the boat and then called the Coast Guard. He does not detail the disagreement. He does not explain the nature of it. He says he has lived with the loss every day. Dennis Davern, the boat captain, has given a different account. He has said, in his 2010 book, Goodbye Natalie, Goodbye Splendor, and in subsequent interviews, and in a sworn statement to investigators, that the disagreement he witnessed was not a minor one. He has said that Wagner was extremely angry. He has said that there was a physical confrontation, or the beginning of one. He has said that after Natalie went missing, Wagner's first response was not to call for help, but to pour himself a drink, and that a significant amount of time passed before the Coast Guard was contacted. These two accounts cannot both be true in all their particulars. One of them is more complete than the other. One of them is more honest than the other. And the investigators who have worked the reopened case have made clear, without being able to say it in legal terms yet, which account they find more credible. Wagner has declined to speak to them. I am not going to tell you that Robert Wagner killed Natalie Wood. I do not know that. The investigation is open and no charges have been filed. And in a just system, that means something. What I will tell you is that the question has not been answered. That the people who deserve an answer, her daughters, her sister, the people who loved her, have not received one. And that a woman called her sister 3 hours before she died and said something was wrong, and the something has never been named. There is a particular grief in unresolved things. It is different from the grief of a loss that is understood. When you know what happened, when the story has a shape, the grief has a shape too. And you can learn to carry something with a shape. When the story does not have a shape, when the ending is missing, the grief stays formless, and it stays present, because there is always the possibility that the shape might still arrive, that the answer might still come, and that possibility keeps the wound open. Lana Wood is in her 80s now. She has spent more than 40 years with that phone call. She has spent more than 40 years saying, in interviews and in print and in documentaries, that her sister called her and said something was wrong. She has said it as many times as people have been willing to listen, because she believes that saying it keeps the question alive, and she believes the question deserves to stay alive until it is answered. She is right. Natalie Wood was a child actress who became a great actress, who became a woman who was trying very hard to live a real life after a childhood that had not prepared her for one. She was afraid of the water, and she was careful about the things she was afraid of, and she called her sister when something felt wrong and her sister was not able to help her in time. And that is the shape of her story as we have it. It is not the whole shape. There is a piece missing at the end, in the dark water off Catalina Island on a November night more than 4 decades ago. And the piece is still missing. Her films are not missing. They are still there. Every one of them. The little girl in Miracle on 34th Street who learns to believe in something. The teenage girl in Rebel Without a Cause who is dying inside the perfect life. The young woman in West Side Story whose face in the moment of grief is one of the most honestly human things ever captured on film. The older woman in her final work, still doing what she had done since she was 7 years old, standing in front of a camera and finding the truth of it. She found the truth of it every single time. That was her gift, and it was a real one, and it outlasts everything else. It outlasts the marriages and the investigations and the open case and the 40 years of questions. It is on the screen. It has always been on the screen. It will be on the screen long after everyone who is searching for the answer to what happened on the Splendor has stopped searching. Watch her sometime. Watch the face. Watch what happens behind the eyes in the moments when the character is not speaking. That is where she lived. That is where she put the things she could not say in any other way. She was one of the finest actresses this country ever made. She was afraid of dark water. She called her sister. She said something was wrong. And then the water took her, and the question has not been answered, and the people who love her are still waiting. Her name was Natalie Wood. She was 43 years old. She deserved a longer life and a cleaner ending and an answer that has not come. Perhaps it will still come. Good night. There is one more thing I want to tell you, and it is about the fear. The fear of dark water is a specific thing. It is not the same as being a poor swimmer or being cautious around boats. Natalie Wood's fear was documented in enough places and described by enough people who knew her that there is no serious question about whether it was real. It was real. It was deep. And it had a history. Her mother told her when she was a child that she would one day die in dark water. This is one of the most reported facts about Natalie Wood's life, and it has been confirmed by multiple sources, including Lana Wood, and it is, when you hold it alongside everything else, one of the most disturbing things about her story. A mother told her small daughter that the water would take her, and then, for the rest of Natalie's life, every time she was near dark water, she felt it. Not as a vague unease, but as a specific, physical dread, the kind that lives in the body rather than the mind. Whether Maria Wood said this as a warning, as a kind of superstitious protection, as a genuine premonition, or as the careless cruelty that sometimes comes from people who do not know how much weight their words carry for a child, we cannot know. Maria is long gone. What we know is the effect. The effect was that Natalie Wood went through her whole life, knowing in the way that children know things their parents tell them before they are old enough to question, that the dark water was waiting for her. And it was. The thing that is almost unbearable about this, if you let yourself sit with it, is that Natalie Wood knew. Not the specific night, not the specific boat, not the specific November, but she knew in some layer of herself that she had been carrying since childhood, that the water was the thing she needed to be afraid of. And she was afraid of it, and she was careful, and it did not matter. Or someone made it not matter. That is the peace we do not have. That is the peace that is still out there somewhere, in the memory of a man who will not speak to investigators, and in the conscience of a boat captain who changed his story 30 years too late, and in the waters off Catalina Island, where nothing is kept and nothing is given back. Lana Wood has said in recent years that she believes she will not live to see the case resolved. She has said this without bitterness, or with the kind of bitterness that has had 40 years to become something quieter and heavier. She says it as a fact. She is in her 80s. The investigation moves slowly. The man who is a person of interest is in his 90s. Time is doing what time does. But she keeps talking. She keeps giving the interviews. She keeps saying every time someone asks her that Natalie called and said something was wrong. Because she believes that as long as she says it, the question stays alive. And as long as the question stays alive, there is the possibility, however small, that someone will finally tell the truth. Her daughters have their own relationship with the question. Natasha has been careful in private. Courtney has been more vocal, more willing to say in public what she believes happened. Neither of them was old enough on the night of November 28, 1981, to understand what they were losing. Natasha was 11, Courtney was 7. They lost their mother on a Saturday night off Catalina Island, and they were told it was an accident, and for 30 years that was the official answer, and it was not, and has never been, a satisfying one. Children who lose parents to unexplained deaths carry a specific kind of wound. It is not just the loss, it is the not knowing. It is growing up with a hole in the story where the ending should be. It is being asked over and over across the years, what happened to your mother? And having to say that you do not know, that no one has told you, that the investigation is still open, that the man who was there will not speak. Natasha and Courtney have carried that for more than 4 decades. They deserve better. They have always deserved better. And the fact that they have not received it is not an accident of time or complexity. It is the result of choices made by people who were on that boat and who decided, for whatever reason, that what they knew was something they were not going to share. I began tonight with a phone call, a woman on a yacht calling her sister and saying something felt wrong. 3 hours before she went into the water. I want to end there too because I think it is the center of the story. Not the death itself, not the investigation, not the films or the marriages or the childhood in front of the camera. The phone call. She reached out. She told the person she trusted most that she was afraid. She did not know exactly what she was afraid of, or she knew and could not say it clearly, or she said it, and the distance and the static on the line and the ordinariness of the hour made it sound like something smaller than it was. She reached out, and she was not reached back in time, and 3 hours later, she was gone. That is the human truth underneath all of it, not the mystery, not the investigation. The ordinary human truth that sometimes the people we love call us and tell us something is wrong, and we do not understand how wrong, and by the time we understand, it is too late. Lana Wood understood too late. She has said so. She has said she would give anything to have that phone call back, to have asked the right question, to have said something different, to have stayed on the line. She cannot have it back. None of us can have back the conversations we needed to have differently. But we can listen more carefully to the ones that are still coming. We can be the person who asks the question that is not quite being asked. We can stay on the line a little longer. That is the only lesson in a story like this that is worth taking. Not the mystery of the dark water, not the unanswered investigation, the phone call, the sister on the other end, the 3 hours that were too late. Natalie Wood was 43 years old. She was afraid of dark water, and she called her sister, and she said something was wrong and she deserved someone to hear her completely. We all deserve that. Take care of yourself, and take care of the people who call you. Good night.